Welcome, 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 ladies and gentlemen from India, South Africa, Europe, Southeast Asia, Singapore, Malaysia, China, and Australia. Wherever you're listening from, we have a wonderful speaker today who is going to address one little niche of a person's development, and that is storytelling. Many do not and are fearful of sharing their segment of their life, their story, primarily because they feel it might be intimidating to some, and in other cases, they're not good enough. We're going to cut that fable off. And what we're going to do is very simple. I've got a lady by the name of Sharon who's got some enormous experience in design and enormous experience in drafting up people's profiling, in getting people up to stage in relation to how best they can showcase themselves. Without much delay, I'm going to invite Sharon on stage for her to share her segment of it to the community. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today.
My pleasure. Our pleasure. Sharon, why don't we kickstart, because of the time factor, why don't we kickstart very quickly into deep diving on you sharing about yourself a little bit and your journey to date in a couple of minutes, sort of
Yeah.
thing.
So I really have to start off by saying that I grew up in the Nilgiris in a wonderful co-educational residential school, and
Hmm.
the special thing about the school was that it wasn't just about the great education that we had, but there was a lot of focus that was given on extracurricular activities, on the games field, vocational studies, and that's really important because that's important for any childhood development. And as an
Hmm.
adult, whenever I look back, I always remember where I grew up from, especially the school that I went to. So that's what I really have to kickstart by saying, giving the importance there where it's due. And then, of course, I went on to doing my bachelor's in economics, and then I went on to doing a little bit of fashion management as well in one of the design schools in India. And post that, that's how I got my foothold into the apparel market. And I started off with visual merchandising, store design, and then I went into communications, and that's where I really found myself.
Right.
It's where I found my passion. It's where I found what I really enjoyed doing. Um, a lot of my self beliefs, limiting self beliefs, disappeared after I got into this role. It gave me a lot of exposure as well because here I was working on communicating for a men's clothing brand, and I got to travel overseas, got a lot of exposure of working with people from different cultures, different backgrounds, very creative people as well. And so it not only added value to my professional life, but I think it also added immense value to my personal life as well because like this whole world opened up.
Right.
I started to work in this particular area, and that's where this whole storytelling, content creation, conceptualization, everything was born from there. And I've
Hmm.
had many great years in the industry. And now at current, I work along with my husband at Movin Dairies Dairy Farm. And I think one of the focal points of what I do on the farm as well is telling the story about our farm, communicating, making people aware of what really goes on behind, and all of that. And love for animals, your passion, everything comes through the storytelling and the communication that we did. So that's who I am.
Right. Right. That's fabulous. That's fabulous, Sharon. Sharon, if I can just deep dive into the next level of getting to understand, because the public out there would have a question. What's this thing called storytelling? What's so special about it? Why are we so engulfed into the idea of getting people to tell their stories? And especially people in the industry of media, people in the industry of doing influence work, coaching, mentoring. Would you like to shed some light in that area, please?
Yeah. So I think as human beings, all of us have to communicate. And when we say we need to communicate, it means conveying a message to somebody. But the
Mhm.
difference between your basic communication and your storytelling is that when you do it when you communicate through storytelling, what you're actually doing is you are creating a connection with the listener. And the way to be able to connect a connection with the listener is to evoke an emotion. And that
Yeah.
emotion can be anything. It could be happiness, it could be It could be joy, it could be sadness, it could be anger, it could be anything. But the point is that that's the power of storytelling. And that is what storytelling is to be able to make the listener understand, is to be able to make the listener evoke an emotion, and it's be able to connect to them on a deeper level. So
Hmm.
that's what storytelling is all about.
Fabulous, fabulous. Now, when we talk about this aspect of storytelling, what's the essence of storytelling? And why does storytelling work? We need to sort of deep dive into that to get an understanding so people can then go ahead and start working with it.
Yeah. I think the very fundamental fact about storytelling is that it's a human activity, and all of us
Hmm.
as humans, we need to be able to communicate, and we need to be able to share our experience, and that's what storytelling does. It allows you, when you are talking to somebody and you share it through a story, you're basically sharing your experience, you're sharing your understanding with them, and you're building a relationship. That's the fundamental essence. And then the second part of it is that there has to be an emotional connection. There, without an emotional connection, there cannot be a deeper connection with the other person. And
Yes.
that's what happens. And so, whether the communication is through oral, whether it's through written, whether it's through imagery, videos, anything, you need to know what you're communicating about, and you need to be able to get an emotion from somebody. So, somebody who's watching it, so that even your communication doesn't go for waste. It doesn't go. Something needs to come out of that, and the most basic thing is getting an emotion from someone. And then what the next thing is also that when you communicate through storytelling, you add meaning to something. So you don't just say, for example, like if you're talking about, let's say, I live in the Nilgiris. Yes, you can tell somebody you live in the Nilgiris. But then if you go a little bit further and you say, I live in the beautiful Blue Mountains, or, because that's another alternate name to the Nilgiris. And when you do
Yes.
that, you allow somebody to go in deeper. You give meaning to something more, you know.
Mm.
And another aspect of storytelling is that what it does for the listener is it stimulates their imagination, and
Yes.
you get to engage with somebody on a deeper level, because that's the essence of storytelling as well. Is that it allows you to, when you talk through a story, you get the other person to actually visualize what you're talking about, and they get to experience it, and then they resonate with it. Because
Mm.
unless they can visualize something, unless they can feel something, because all of us are doing the same thing. All of us go home, all of us go to work, all of us are looking for happiness. I mean, it's the same thing, but how we go about doing it is different. And when you have the opportunity of communicating with somebody, and if you use your experiences and your stories to communicate with them, this is what happens. And the moment you get somebody's attention by allowing them to visualize something, allowing them to experience it, it resonates with them, the engagement is bound to happen. They're going to start talking to you again. So that's another essence of storytelling. And to basically sum up the essence of storytelling is that when you communicate through storytelling, you've got to be able to let the other person learn something from your story. They've got to experience it, they've got to learn it, and they've got to have that deeper understanding. So you need to know that, when you're talking through a story, what exactly am I wanting to communicate to that person? And you just do it in this wonderful way of storytelling, rather than just having a direct conversation saying, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, and that's what's happened. So you go this extra level, and that's, to sum it up, if you look at it, it's emotional connection, it's a human activity, it adds meaning to what your otherwise conversation could probably be just boring. And it adds this whole imagination and engagement to it. So that's what the essence of it, and that's why it's important.
Yeah. So your point about communication is so vital, Sharon, because many don't realize that's the heartbeat to any connect. And
Yes.
human beings are creatures of habit and creatures of social interaction.
Yeah.
Hence, as I put it very bluntly, to me, communication is when a person is able to do that effectively is the
Yes.
power of it. So in any relationship, communication is like blood to life. You take blood away from life, what happens to life? It dies. You take
Exactly.
communication away from a relationship, what happens to a relationship? It dies. And many do not see that as the essence. Now, you have fabric this through beautifully to say it's got an emotional connect, it's got meaning to it, it's got human connection to it. Putting all that together, you now have been able to showcase the tapestry of that person. The tapestry is made up of that individual's education, that individual's experience through life up to that point, and that individual's exposure. Like in your case, if you said, I've only lived in Chennai, I've gone up to the Nilgiris, and that's my story, that's a story. It's
Yeah.
limited. But now, with you saying, I have worked with an organization in the apparel industry, I have traveled to Europe, I've traveled to Australia, I've traveled to certain countries that has actually enriched my life, your connect is so different. So, when you understand that, you now come up with a thing called branding. So, how are you going to work through and engulf this brand identity into this whole concept of storytelling?
Yeah.
Pardon me.
I think one of the, just continuation in what you were just talking about, I think most often people get intimidated as well by stories because they think that they need to have these fabulous big moments in their life, big stories of things that happen. But what we fail to understand is it's all these little things that happen to us every day is what makes up the stories of who we are. And when you are able to recognize all these small moments and you're able to understand that there's value in all these small moments and these are the small stories that make up who I am, then it's so obvious that when you are communicating and when you're doing it through storytelling, that any story that comes from you. It's your brand, it's your identity,
Mm.
it's your window to the world to tell them that, hey, through this story, somebody gets to know a little bit about who I am. And that story could be that story could be an experience that you've encountered. It could be a hardship, it could be um, it could be a deep connection that you've had with something, but your ability to express that through the story becomes your brand identity. And sometimes it's not so much about what the story is about, but it's also about how you communicate that story. So when you talk about it, you need to have that that passion, and the story that you're talking about has to have that relatability because it needs to be something that the listener can relate to.
Yeah.
You cannot talk about something that's highly science fictional if the person next to you just doesn't know about it, or if you're not living it as well, if you're not living that experience. So it needs to be relatable, and there has to be relevance to the situation as well. So when you've got all this going, so when you pick up on all these these small stories in your life and you're able to communicate it with passion, with relatability, with relevance to it, that's when you are able to build a deeper connection and you're able to allow the person who's listening to you to get an insight. It's like a window into your soul, into your life, into who you are and what you are doing, and that becomes a shared experience that you have with them. So it's vital for all of us to really pay attention to storytelling, because that's one way to make us look interesting as well. Otherwise you just come across as
Yes,
a boring person. And
exactly, exactly.
nobody who wants to communicate with you further, because it's like, my name is Sharon, I'm this, I'm that, and you're done. No, I mean, share a little bit more about yourself, because then it's going to be enjoyable for both sides of it. Yeah.
Hmm.
And
Deep,
you know
sorry, deep diving from that, I want to sort of get to the crux of this. What's the purpose then? You just mentioned that it extends certain excitement, it extends exposure to the individual, tries him or her to get to understand the other person. My point is, when you share a story, and I put videos on this out, I tell people very bluntly, you are a very selfish person if you do not share your story to the world. And
yes.
many have come back to me and said, Dave, that's very hard and fast and sometimes very rude to even say that. I said, no, because as creatures of the human life here, unless we can share our own life and our own story, we're of no purpose in this world. So, what in your thoughts are the purpose to storytelling, and how can you extrapolate that out so others can see it and say, yeah, I need to be more attuned to this.
Um, David, the main thing about stories is that it the fundamental thing is it teaches us about life. That's it.
Hmm.
It teaches us about life. It teaches us about ourselves, because see, even when we are talking about storytelling and we are talking about picking up on all these small moments in our life, as
Yes.
as the storyteller, you have to be able to self reflect as well in your life to be able to pick up on all of that. And all of us know the power of self reflection and power of introspecting and all of these wonderful modalities. All of us are aware of that. And so when you talk about the purpose of storytelling, it's so beneficial for both the storyteller and the listener, because when you share that experience of storytelling with somebody else, whatever that is, that experience that you're sharing, it teaches you and them about what life is, and it teaches you about yourself. And then it also gives you the opportunity to develop an understanding and respect for people from different countries, people from different ethnicities, people from different backgrounds, religions. It really gives you that, because if you look at it, for example, just to give you a rough example, when you talk about India, it's so the story has been handed down to us for a number of years. You immediately associate it with Mahatma Gandhi, and when you think
Yes.
about Mahatma Gandhi, it becomes the story of nonviolence. This is a country's identity. I mean, that's the purpose of storytelling. It's like we said, it's about not just about your brand identity, but it also tells you about your heritage. It tells you about past, where you come from. And just sharing that. I mean, when you are traveling overseas and you meet people have such different notions and ideas about where you come from. And a lot of times when I used to travel overseas, I used to tell people, if you meet me, it doesn't mean that you've met the whole of India. you know
Yes.
and
That's
if
right.
you meet somebody else, it doesn't mean you met the whole of India, because we are all so different from, so you've got to listen to my stories and my experience to understand who I am. And that becomes the purpose of storytelling. You share and you learn and you grow from it, and you develop this sense of identity, this sense of appreciating somebody else, of where they come from and what they do. And all of us know the immense benefits of that you know um,
So true.
that
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 the perception that comes in when you do that is so different. Now, the way you slice that apple to share your perspective of India to a person, let's say here in Australia when you came out to do some work, is so different to me being an Indian who's been there for a period of time and come back to Australia. And so the two perspectives are so different. Hence, the power is on how you effectively share your experience, as you pointed
yes,
out.
yes,
Number one. Number two, share your exposure, because the way you see it will be based on how you have been brought through, how your value systems have been graded into you, how your belief factors have been brought into you. So, storytelling, though it might be the same subject, varies from person to person, situation to situation, country to country. And that's the power we have. And if we can fabricate very well, my gosh, we've got a huge power in disclosing that to the general public out there.
yeah. It really gives you this option to develop a positive attitude,
Yes,
to
yes,
people, to cultures. For me, my whole world opened up after that. In terms of what I believed, how I viewed the world, how I viewed myself. And even after I've come back years after all of that experience, I still look back and I think about it. In fact, the other day I extended my gratitude to my director for it. I said that, I said, I'm so grateful for having had all of those experiences, because, like I said, it not just broadened my horizon in terms of, in terms of my professional life, but my personal life as well, because I can see how this exchange of ideas, this creativity, because we were in the creative field and we were creating, I mean, of course, we were creating stories for the brand, for the company,
yes.
but, I mean, all of this today that I'm able to, I'm able to be here on air and to tell you this story or to share this experience is it's just priceless.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Pulling that in, what are some of the benefits? Can you crystallize that of storytelling?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned earlier, so when you are the storyteller, it isn't about the fact that you're only adding value to the listener. There are certain benefits that even you are receiving, when you decide to tell a story. Because the most fundamental thing is, first of all, you need to understand that when you do it through effective storytelling, there's a connection that is built between the storyteller and the listener. Because you are now on this journey where you share this experience, you're sharing emotions that you've gone through. There's an understanding, there's a connection, and that space of connection gives you the ability or the space for self reflection. It gives you the space for empathy building. It gives you the ability to learn from each other's experience, and eventually you play it forward, and it
Mm.
fosters this sense of community and kindredship, because now there's no going back. It's like
Yes.
you always talk to us about the rubber band when it's being stretched. So when you have shared that story or that experience with somebody, and you've built in this very short, and this can happen very fast, okay? It doesn't need to be that you need to tell a 60-minute long story. You could just share one experience, and if it resonates with that person, and if it's done well, the connection is built. And when the connection is built, and you look at, from a storyteller's point of view, one, it's given you the opportunity to release emotions. Because even when you're sharing that story, even you're feeling it, you're experiencing it, and you gain perspective. Because when you are looking back at an experience and you decide to share that experience with somebody, it's because you have gained perspective on that, you know so that's one of the benefits. And then, as I mentioned earlier, self reflection of your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions of that experience that you've gone through. So that's a benefit that you take away from it. And there's an effective communication of emotions. That's
Mm.
what is really really important as well. Because uh, if you are in a situation where you're talking about something, and you want to share this really happy experience, and then you need to know how to communicate that happiness as well. You
Exactly.
can't sit there with a poker face and talk about something that's supposed to be happy. And so
Exactly.
you learn to, when I need to be sad, if I'm talking about something sad, or if I need, it's all part of that. It's just like watching a movie, in that you can't have somebody dying and then having somebody sitting there and laughing. I mean, it doesn't make sense. So you learn to
Doesn't connect. Yes.
you learn to put the emotion together with that. So that's what it does to the storyteller. And when you are able to communicate through storytelling, another fundamental benefit that comes to the storyteller is that it boosts your self-esteem. Because
Good.
you now know that it's like you have the world in your hands. Because you've gone past this. I mean, you've been able to communicate effectively with emotion, you've been able to self reflect, you've been able to gain perspective on what you're sharing, and that does so much to your self esteem. So this is my summary of what it does to somebody. So if somebody's hesitating to tell a story, then you're losing out on all of this, because these
Very
are the
much.
benefits. Yeah.
Very much.
And
Sorry,
and
I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to cover a few other things also as we go through. Sharon, how does incorporating storytelling? How would you do that in your day-to-day life?
um, as I mentioned earlier, Mr. David, I think, first of all, personal anecdotes, experiences, even small details about your day, you need to start becoming aware of it. I became aware of this through, when I read the book, I Can See Clearly Now by Dr. Wayne Dyer, where you look back at these quantum moments of your life and you pick it up. So that book really gave me this whole insight, and I started to pick up on all these, different situations in my life. So it's the same thing for everybody else. Look at the details, look at the small things. And anything that you decide to communicate, like I said, whether it's visual, whether it's oral or anything, add emotional depth. Make sure that whatever the story you're communicating, however it is, whether it's through visuals, like they say, a picture speaks 1,000 words. it's
Yeah.
it's the same thing. If you're communicating the picture, make sure you know what you're communicating about. Have that emotion, let somebody feel something. um, Include stories of your personal challenges, include any encounters, meaningful encounters that you've had, weave it around the narrative of your story. Add it, because that's going to add value to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Family history, uh, passed down stories from generations. All of us have stories in our families. I shared one the other day with all of you about my father's hobby of collecting stamps that we discovered. I mean, it's 35 years since he passed, and it was the first time that I got to see it. And it was brilliant because it gave you an insight into somebody, of what they were interested in, what they did, and how passionate they were about. So that's again another part. Look at your family history, look at the stories that your family have, share that with somebody else, and use stories. Now, if you were in a situation where you needed to give somebody advice in life, don't just give them advice. Share a story, share some experience that maybe you've had or somebody else has had, and let them understand, let them derive the conclusions from that through your story. So these are the ways in which you can incorporate a storytelling. Start working on this, and then before you know it, when you're building your own brand, whether it's yourself or your company or anything, all of this will come into play.
Yeah,
Yes.
so true, so true. Moving on from there, let me just frame in story for someone out there to see how they could do it. Meaning, can everyone tell a story? And if so, how can they tell an epic story that stands out?
David, I always remember this wonderful experience that I've had on the farm. How much
Mhm.
time do we have? Do we have 5 minutes or 10 minutes?
I've got 4 minutes, actually,
Four
three to four
minutes.
minutes.
Okay, okay. So, when I'm on the farm and we've got both cows and buffaloes, the buffaloes have a very adverse reaction, whenever I pass by, unlike my husband or anybody else. And it's just mayhem when I cross by. And, a few months ago when we had a shortage of labor on the farm, my duty was to feed the calves. Okay. And so, we had a calf pen and I would stand outside and feed them with the bottles. And there was this one little calf that, could not make it there because she was too tiny. And so that meant I had to get into the pen. So when I used to get into the pen, it was mayhem again, because somebody would be pulling my t-shirt, somebody would be doing all of these little things, and I would know that the next 10-15 minutes this is how it's going to be. And I had this one buffalo calf that used to have a separate pen but was next to me, and she would just gently come and put all her weight on my shoulder, and she would
Mm.
lick me a little bit, and she would wait, but she would wait for her turn till we had to feed her. And then and I was so taken aback by it, because every other buffalo calf on the farm does not react to me that way. And so I asked Arun, what's the why is she like this? So he said, Shan, she lost her mother, a few days after she was born. And only us as humans have been hand holding her for a long time, and buffaloes need their moms with them. And so he said, maybe she's built this relationship with you because you're feeding her and all of that. And so I said, but why is she separated? So he said, she has this ability of sucking the other calf's ears, and she tore another calf's ear. So he said, so we had to separate her, from the rest of the herd. So I said, okay, great. And so this went on months and months, week after week. And then I saw that she progressed to the next shed with all the other calves. And, I was traveling, I was busy. And there was this one time that I walked into after quite a few weeks, I walked into the farm, and I made a dash to the end of where all the herd was and everything. And I saw this one buffalo. I mean, now she's grown up a little bit more. I didn't know it was her, but I saw one of them react, and I thought, they're just responding the way they usually respond when I cross by. And so I walked away and came back to the the calf pen. And when I came to the calf pen, I realized she was not there. And she used to make this very funny noise when she was small. She used to say oink, she would make. And so I started to call her Oinky, and she knew her name. So I suddenly realized that Oinky was no longer here in the calf pen. She had, she's been promoted to the herd shed. And so I made this dramatic run across the farm, and I said, Oinky, Oinky, because I knew, she was there. And I cannot tell you the connection that's been built. It was priceless, because she was ready to jump out of the shed. She had both her front legs on the post that was there, and the boys had to come in and help her to get down. And then one of the old laborers there, he told me in Hindi, he said, the relationship between the two of you is just is so beautiful. And I learned so much that day, David. I really learned that there's a connection with animals,
Yeah.
and it's I don't know, it was such an insight into that animal soul. It was such an insight into myself as a person, that
Mm.
of my ability to being able to connect with that animal. um, Fantastic. And for me, I think this is the essence as well of storytelling. This is what makes a story epic, because when you as a person experience that emotion, you experience that connection, it's a real time experience. And if you can take the story and you can share, because whenever I share posts, or I share stories with a lot of other people, so many people, sometimes I don't know that they're viewing the communication that we put up, but people come back to me and say, I didn't know that this is how an animal reacts, or I didn't know that this happens on a farm. And I think that's what is beautiful. If you can evoke that emotion in somebody, if you can tell a story beautifully well, and if you can capture the essence of why and what is important about what you're sharing, that's what makes a story epic.
Wow, thank you. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Sharon, we are running out of time. We've actually run out of time. As a part to the community out there, could you just give them a takeaway that they can crystallize and hang on to when they do their own stories?
I think that for
One take.
anybody who's looking at getting themselves more involved, the first important thing is to realize that stories are transformative. Please understand that when you have the power of communicating to somebody else, that power is in your hands. And how you communicate, what you communicate, how effective you are in, like, all the things that we've talked about today, you can transform somebody else's life. You can lead it to personal growth, development, not just for yourself but for the listener as well. And it's a storytelling is a universal human experience. Wherever you go, if you communicate through storytelling and it's effective and it's beautiful and it has all of the things we've discussed before, you can build connections wherever you are. And so
Fabulous,
keep
fabulous.
that in mind. It's transformative and it's a human experience. You cannot go wrong with it if you understand the fundamentals of it and you have no inhibitions about sharing that your experiences with somebody else. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Sharon. Truly appreciate your time coming online and sharing your perspective of storytelling to the community out there at large. And I'm hopeful we can connect again in downstream on another segment of either storytelling or enriched other flavors of your topic of branding. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure.
Take care now. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.